I've said it plenty of times, I like hard games, but I understand that they're not for everyone. And that's okay, but one thing I've noticed over the last couple of years, one discussion keeps popping up every so often. Some people are convinced that it is wrong for games to be inherently difficult and to not have an easy mode. Generally, you'll see this whenever a new difficult game gets some attention, such as Cuphead or Sekiro. Both of these games are quite challenging, and they don't really have an option to get rid of that challenge. Well, technically Cuphead does have an easy mode, but it actually locks off content, so you're not getting the full experience there. These people will argue that it is morally wrong for these games to not be easier, or to at least not have options to make it easier. And they'll usually use a lovely little buzzword called accessibility. The argument typically boils down to 3 main points. 1. Disabled gamers need an easy mode so they can actually experience these games despite the limitations of their body and/or mind. 2. Games are meant to be fun, and a high level of difficulty can take away from the fun that other elements of the game can bring. 3. A high degree of difficulty acts as a barrier to entry for less skilled players who deserve to enjoy the game as much as skilled players. Now, I believe that the majority of people who make these arguments are coming from a good place. They just want everyone to be able to enjoy all the great games out there, including games that might be restrictive to certain players due to their difficulty. However, I believe that entire mentality is flawed. So let's go through these points one by one. And yes, being disabled is going to make it harder to play certain games than it would be if that same person were not disabled. But oftentimes, the argument for making games easier comes from the assumption that disabled gamers can't be highly skilled, which is why they supposedly need an easy mode. Not only is that factually inaccurate, it's also, and I don't use this term lightly, very ableist. There are plenty of incredible disabled gamers out there, and they're not all that hard to find. Here's a short clip of Limitless Squad, a quadriplegic gamer absolutely wrecking the corrupted monk fight from Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, which I haven't actually played yet, but shush, it's on my to-do list. Full link in the description. Go check them out. One thing I've learned from my admittedly limited interaction with disabled gamers is that they're incredible at adaptation. They live their lives with a set of challenges that the rest of us don't have to deal with, and they're used to finding ways to work around their disabilities. Again, a quadriplegic beat Sekiro without an easy mode. He was not kept away from that game due to his disability or its difficulty. Now, I can actually get behind measures to improve on actual accessibility issues. I just don't think that accessibility means dumb it down and make it easier. For example, a guy named Ben Heckendorn designed a one-handed PlayStation 4 controller. Games that have rebindable controls allow for players to actually set up the game however they'd like, which disabled gamers can use if their disability makes it harder to use the default control scheme. Many games now include options that change the display to account for different forms of colorblindness. My point is that you don't need to make a game easier to make it more accessible. Disabled gamers don't need you to hold their hand through the gaming experience. The goal should be to let them play as naturally as possible, not just lower the difficulty as if it addresses the actual issue. Second argument, the fun factor. This argument boils down to, games are supposed to be fun, why force difficulty upon the players? Well, I actually think that games aren't necessarily meant to be fun, but rather satisfying, with fun being the byproduct. Players find enjoyment in their games when they're satisfied with what the experience has to offer. And here's the thing about that. Different players find different things satisfying. For some, a compelling narrative with gameplay that complements that narrative is all they want in a game, whereas others don't care about story or lore whatsoever and just want to engage with the core gameplay loop. Doom 2016 is a game that has a pretty awful story, basically providing context for the gameplay and nothing else. But it has extremely tight controls and exciting gameplay. The narratively interested player would likely hate it, whereas the other one would love it. And the reverse would likely be true for a game like Firewatch, a narrative-focused game where the actual gameplay is mostly just walking from place to place in order to advance the story. Again, different people want different things out of their games. Doesn't make anyone right or wrong, it's just the way it is. That being said, one thing that I and many others like in our games is a challenge. Now, I'm only speaking for myself here, but I view most games as a set of obstacles to overcome, and feel extremely satisfied when I can beat a difficult challenge through my own skill and dedication. So if a developer wants to strip the difficulty from a game, that would actively make it less fun for me. I mean, look at my review of Grease. Alongside all the praise I had for the game, it was just too easy for the gameplay to be very fun or engaging to me. And another thing, being able to customize difficulty settings is not always a good thing for the player. Now, I'm usually all about player choice, but it's a fact that oftentimes players will actively make decisions geared more towards efficiency than personal enjoyment. Here's an example. Save scumming. That's when you save your game, attempt something, and then just load back in every time you screw up. While there are exceptions, this typically leads to less overall enjoyment and also encourages players to completely throw out the concept of risk versus reward, because if you save scum, there's basically no risk of dying whatsoever. Darkest Dungeon addresses this issue of players making unfun choices by having no manual saves whatsoever and constant autosaves, so every action has consequences. If you lose a hero, they're gone. This makes you plan your actions and you actually have to get invested in the events as they unfold because they actually matter. The same idea can apply to difficulty. There are plenty of people who will turn down difficulty settings if allowed to at pretty much any hurdle, even if they don't actually need it. It's just the natural response of our brains to attempt the path of least resistance. But a lot of times, it's actually possible to overcome challenges you never thought you could, and you just need to keep at it. And let me tell you, it feels good to finally win without making it easier on yourself. Look, I know firsthand how much more satisfied I am when I don't make my games easier, but when given the option, it can be really fucking hard to resist despite my better judgment. I prefer not to be tempted by the option to take the easy path. Furthermore, it's not even always possible to lower a game's difficulty without fundamentally changing it completely. A good example is Celeste, a notoriously difficult yet beloved platformer. A lot of its difficulty is in the actual level design, with each block, enemy, and platform serving a vital purpose where oftentimes the removal of a single obstacle will make the stage literally impossible to complete. Its version of an easy mode is what they call assist mode. Rather than making the game itself easier, as that would be pretty much impossible, it basically acts as a cheat engine. Assist mode allows you to reduce the game's speed, toggle infinite stamina, give yourself infinite dashes, and make yourself invincible. Now, I'm not against cheats existing, but to me, playing with these options enabled destroys what the game is all about. A large part of what made me fall in love with Celeste was the learning process as I went from stumbling my way through the most basic of obstacles to breezing through stages that required crazy timing and technique. If I had played Celeste with assist mode, I'm not sure I'd look back on it so fondly. But a cheat mode was pretty much the only way to actually lower the difficulty without completely changing the absolutely stellar level design. I actually find that Celeste's very generous checkpoint system is much better in terms of actual accessibility than assist mode. Celeste is all about learning and improving as you climb that mountain. Taking away the challenge also takes away from the very poignant message the game is trying to send. To be perfectly honest, I think that most of you watching this video could probably beat Celeste without assist mode, even if you don't think you can. That is what the game is all about, overcoming your obstacles and achieving things that initially seem impossible. I'm willing to bet that there are players who went through the entire game on assist mode who still think they're not good enough to beat it normally, even though they actually are. I think that's kinda sad, and I honestly think their experience was worse off because of it. Sometimes difficulty is baked into a game, and the way I see it, that's okay. I don't think that easy modes necessarily add to the fun factor of games, and in some cases, having the option actively harms that end. Okay, now onto the final argument. Hard games with no easy mode are a barrier for unskilled players. Yes, they are. So what? Seriously, here's the thing. There are absolutely players that will not enjoy certain games because of their difficulty and may therefore not play a game that others enjoy immensely. But that's not really a problem for a couple of reasons. First of all, there are already more great games than you and I could ever play in our entire lifetime, with new ones coming out every day. Let's be real here. If you don't get to play a certain game, it's not the end of the world. I promise you'll move on. Secondly, if you feel like a game's difficulty is a barrier to entry, maybe the game just isn't for you. And that's okay. Not every game is for every player, and I think we need to completely reject the notion that they should be. Look, there are plenty of games out there that try to appeal to as many people as possible. It makes sense since that means more sales. However, when a game goes for the lowest common denominator, it loses its ability to specialize and really appeal to specific demographics. The end result is usually a middling project that gets forgotten after a few years. I believe that games truly shine when the developers allow them to unapologetically be what they truly are. And that means that some players who aren't into that won't like the game. And that's okay. As I mentioned earlier, different gamers like different things in their video games, and that means if a game is to truly excel in one aspect, it could alienate players who don't like that thing. But that doesn't mean the game isn't good, it just means that it's not for everyone. There are great games out there that I personally don't like, but I don't begrudge the players who do. I personally don't like collectible card games. I just dislike the deck building and card hunting process. But hey, people love games like Hearthstone, Magic, and Legends of Runeterra, and I say more power to them. As I said earlier, there are plenty of other games I can enjoy in the meantime. Look, do we really want all new game releases to be something that every single player can kind of enjoy? In that scenario, sure, everyone will have a decent enough time playing, but for the most part, you'll play it once and then never touch it again. It won't be special. I'd much rather have a bunch of games that go for something truly unique and specialized. Something that some players will hate, but others will absolutely adore. It's those games that really define what gaming is all about to me. Difficulty can absolutely be restrictive to some players, but so what? Maybe that just means that the game isn't for them. There is nothing wrong with it and there is no shame in it. But not liking a game is no excuse to try to make it change the very things that other players do like. To me, this argument that it's somehow wrong for a game to be too hard for anybody is ridiculous. You not liking a game is not always indicative of a problem with the game itself. Every time this argument that games should all have easy modes comes up, it annoys me. It's partly because some people do absolutely like to speak on behalf of disabled gamers who themselves are generally not on board with this position, but also because it shows a lack of understanding about how gaming should be. Every gamer I know has at least one game that is truly special to them, that brings them joy like nothing else. The fact that this is different for every person speaks volumes, and I think that these different perspectives should be cherished rather than demonized. Of course, valid criticism of games is always a good thing, but this should come from the perspective of objectivity, or at least as close as a human being can come to it. It's not to my taste is not valid criticism, and that's what I think this argument for easy modes boils down to.
Call me a killjoy, but I think that because this is not to my taste, no one else should be able to enjoy it.
And to be clear, I would hold this position even if I personally didn't like hard games. That's because it's none of my business to demand that something change because it doesn't cater to my specific whims. I understand that people enjoy things that I don't, and I'm not one to try to take that away from people. It'd be nice if everyone else thought that way too. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe if you want to see more. I upload every Monday, so make sure to check back in next week. Follow me on Twitter at AdsTweets for updates and memes, and follow me on Twitch at AdsGames if you want to see how I edit these videos. Once again, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next Monday.
Hit the road, Jack, and don't you come back no more, no more, no more, no more. Hit the road, Jack, and don't you come back.